So I was trying to decide what types of lumber I wanted to put into the board. Walnut, maple, and cherry are your main three that you typically put into a cutting board. There's sometimes some exotics that can be really pretty, like purple heart I've got up there and some padauk. But this Wenge right here, it's a naturally dark, almost black wood. Comes out of Central Africa. It's just a really beautiful wood. It's not super commonly used in cutting boards, but you will find some that use it. Anyways, I think it's beautiful, and I want to add just a couple of accents to this edge grain board that we're gonna make. First step here is picking out a couple of pieces and cutting them to length. Now, I buy my lumber S3S, which lets me just get straight into cutting. Maybe someday, if I've got a bigger shop, I'll be able to joint big boards like this. But for now, this just saves me time. Now, the boards that I make are usually 12 by 18 inches by about 1.5 inches thick. Just to give me some extra room to play with, I cut about 20-inch lengths, and I'm just gonna start ripping it down. All right, so that Wenge is only S2S, so I am gonna joint one side of the Wenge. It just kind of keeps it safe when you're running it through the table saw, keeps it from binding up against the fence. The great part about this shop is that it's agile, I like to call it. Everything can be moved around as necessary to make some room here, which I have to do frequently. I'm gonna move this table saw out of the way so I can just run these few pieces of Wenge through. So that Wenge has been jointed, and that's the only wood in this board that's S2S, so it's the only wood that needed to be jointed like that. So now I need to just put everything back. Constantly rearranging the shop. It's just the way it always goes in here. So, and you're always hitting stuff. All right. Gotta make sure you shim the table saw. I'm pretty sure you won't find that in the manual as acceptable, but with a house this old, you're never gonna have a level floor, so. So we've got our 20-inch strips ready to go to the table saw and get ripped down to the thickness that we want our cutting board to be when we're all said and done. Like I said, I like the finished board to be about 1.5 inches thick. So in order to get there, I'm gonna rip strips a little bit more than 1.5 inches. I'll just do 1 5/8 inches today. Lock it in the fence, and I think we're good to go. So we just cut down several strips of 1 5/8 inches tall pieces of wood. Now, once we go to make the cutting board, we're gonna rotate each of these, and now it's gonna be the height of our cutting board. So at this point, you can get a really rough idea here of where we're going. I'm not really creating a pattern here, but really we're gonna get several of these pieces basically glued together, something, you know, like about this wide. That looks pretty good to me. In order to make this a little more of an interesting board, you want to kind of vary these widths here. So now what I'm going to be doing is cutting thin rips and get 2 pieces of thinner wood that I can then distribute throughout the board and kind of give it a little bit more of a creative look. I'm going to set my thickness to, actually I might just slam it against this. This is giving me just under 1/2 inch. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna give me a couple different thicknesses. It's not gonna be perfectly down the middle, but actually I might like this better. I'm gonna run that through. I think I like that. So now we've got some different sized, thinner pieces. So the Wenge actually kind of came out an in-between size, and that's because that was my thickest board I had. So the offcut side is thicker on just the Wenge. We need to make sure all of the glue joints are nice and flat. So to do that, we're gonna run over to the drum sander. If the wood is bowed or cupped, that's not actually really a problem because the clamp will be able to clamp that and get that nice and sealed up. What I'm really looking for at this step or at this stage is you see how even when I've kind of applied just pressure, just with my hand here, you can see that there's a little bit of a gap right here between the walnut and the maple here. And then it kind of gets flush again down here, so that's good. So what we're trying to solve for right now is this gap. Besides aesthetics, it's a strength issue as well. We want to make sure that the wood can have a really close contact to the other piece of wood and not cause any sort of twisting or warping joint failures down the line. Anyways, that's the goal of what we're doing right now. Getting rid of all those little imperfections to try and get it so that when we push these boards together, whatever boards they are, it looks nice and flat all along, and then we know that we're good for a glue up. So let's get started. Like I was saying, it's time to drum sand, which is in the corner there. And so once again, I need to kind of rearrange some things so I can actually access it and actually get boards in and out of the drum sander. It's really just a game of Tetris. I have measured this precisely, but that Sawzall right there is new, so I wonder if I'll clear that. Oh, not quite. Oh yeah, we got it. All right. Okay, we're set up, and I've officially boxed myself in, basically, so, you know, maybe a few years ago I could have squeezed through there, but now I typically just crawl under that table or roll everything back where it came from. So it's a fun shop to work in. The other thing that I didn't do yet, I like to mark all these boards and you can see what has and hasn't been sanded, and that's gonna help me make sure that the joints come out flat. And so even though this is a pretty boring part of the process, it is really obviously important. This will make or break a board. You really need to make sure you've got good solid glue joints if you don't want that board to fail in a couple of years. So I like to think that that's kind of where the quality also comes in of it being a handmade product. It's a little bit tedious, but it's definitely worth it. I know this maple is gonna cause me a headache. I mean, just look at that thing, huh? Oh, geez. All right, so we're finally done with the drum sander. That step can take a while, but now fortunately, when you push these boards together, you know, there's pretty much minimal gap, so I'm pretty confident that these will have a solid glue joint. So now's where the fun kind of creative part comes in. You can start playing around with different pieces of wood, different species, and try and come up with a cool pattern. So I actually don't know what I'm gonna make yet, but I think I'm gonna start with, I'm just gonna grab some walnut and kind of go from there. I think I'm gonna do a couple pieces of walnut in the middle, maybe something like that. And so now I'm really just grabbing some random boards of something that I think could look kind of cool. I really like the Wenge. It's just such a dark, contrasting color to that light colored maple. I just really think that's cool looking. And you can see like these are both walnut, as well as these two in the middle, yet they're different colors. And walnut is one of the woods that's really known for having a variation in its coloration. From the sapwood to the heartwood. It's a pretty cool wood to work with, so kind of liking where this is going. I might throw in a couple of these thin strips of maple here, just to give it a little bit of a highlight at the edge. And then maybe a couple more Wenges. And then I'm looking for just a couple pieces of similarly colored walnut here to kind of wrap this up. I always like to wrap up the boards with a darker wood. Typically, I just feel like that looks a lot better. I'm gonna grab my tape real quick and just see how wide this is. Looks like we're coming out at just about over 12 inches, which is about perfect, because after I'm done finishing the board, it'll come down to, you know, about 12 inches or something like that. I think we're good. I'm ready to glue it up and throw it in the clamps. Okay. This is not the best way to do this. Just keeping pressure. All right, made it. All right, this is the messy part. This is what handmade means right here. I'll spread the glue on all of these pieces now. All right, that was a lot of glue. Time to start tilting up. Okay, and so I'm gonna start moving my clamps up. Now these clamps are they're really kind of gummed up from the last few boards I've done, so we'll see how well I can get these clamps in. Might have to struggle a little. That went better than expected. Okay, so the board's looking good. It's all clamped up, nice and tight. So now we're good to let this sit overnight, and now it's time to wash the glue off my hands. So we have got a glued up edge grain cutting board now. It's been sitting here for close to 24 hours. So I'm gonna remove this from the clamps, take it in the next room, and then we're going to plane this down. Watch your head here and here. It's the hunchback cave. All right, now I need to get the planer into this room. Like a glove. Oh. All right, planer is set up. So now we're gonna plane this board. The purpose of planing is to get the top and the bottom nice and flat. So then after planing, we should be able to put the board down on this side or on this side, and it should sit perfectly flat without any wobble on it. Unfortunately, after I planed it, I did notice it does have a little bit of wobble now. You can kind of see when I'm pressing on one corner of the board, on this opposite corner, it does kind of lift this corner right here. I still just don't like to produce something that has a wobble like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the planer sled and shim this up so it has no more wobble in it, and then send that to the planer to try and eliminate that wobble. So now we've got both sides nice and flat. I'm gonna set up a track saw on this table. So we're gonna cut a 90-degree angle here to just square off these ends, get these messy ends trimmed basically from the glue up. So we have a nice rectangular board now. So I'm just gonna cut right there. And same thing over here. I'm gonna throw on my mask real quick. Working right under this duct. Now what we're gonna do is throw a nice chamfer along the top and the bottom perimeter of the board. I've already got my chamfer bit in my router, which is mounted to the underside of this router table. So I should be able to just roll this board right across and get a nice chamfer along the edge. So we can go ahead and do that. I'm gonna hook up some dust collection and we'll get going. So we've done our first pass. It's got a really light 45-degree chamfer on here now. I know it looks pretty minimal, and it is, but I'm telling you, more passes, removing less material per pass is definitely the way to go. Not only is it a little bit safer, but it just prevents it from chipping out. But we're gonna raise the bit up, do a more aggressive pass, and we're probably gonna do that 2 or 3 more times. So we have got the edge profile done on our board now. So I'm gonna take it over here and put a juice groove in. So let me grab the jig for that. Okay. So now the jig is secured to the table, the board is secured within the jig, there is zero play, which is really important. And what the juice groove is I'm gonna run this router all along the board here using this jig as a guide. So I'm gonna keep this plate, this base plate on the router flush against this guide, all the way to each corner and keep going all the way around this board. And what it's gonna do is create a groove all along the perimeter of the board, and it's to catch the juices from anything you might be cutting on the board, any fruits or meats, and it helps prevent it from running onto your countertop. And it also gives us a really nice aesthetic look to the board, so it's a really nice touch. But a lot of woodworkers consider this next step to be one of the scariest because it is a little bit tricky, and if you mess it up, it's pretty hard to save the board at that point, because if you accidentally, even just for a minute, take this router off the jig, it's a pretty big mistake and it's pretty hard to fix. So once again, just like at the router table, really light passes, do it multiple times, and just go slow. We finished up the juice groove and I was able to keep it tight to the fence the whole time, so no mistakes. So now the next step is gonna be sanding and finishing this board. But before I even get to that, I need to clear up this space in here a little bit, get this planer out of here, make some room to actually do some sanding. So I'm gonna do that now. Gotta pop this jig loose just so I can get the planer out of this room. Every inch matters here. Okay. Oh. Okay, now it's time to start sanding this board. So I usually start at 60 grit, go to 120, 180, and then 220, and then I'll pop the grain, and then I'll come back with 320 to finish the board. So I'm gonna work through those grits now. This is one of the most monotonous parts of finishing a cutting board, but it's really important. This step will get this board feeling glass smooth. Anyways, I'm gonna get started here using my orbital sander, and then I'm gonna go through and hand sand the juice grooves and work my way up through the grits. Sanded up to 220 grit, both in the juice grooves and on the rest of the board. So it's feeling pretty nice and smooth now. What I'm gonna do now though is what they call pop the grain. That is when you get the board just a little bit wet. And what that'll do is it'll get the fibers on the wood to kind of stand up on end. And then we're gonna come back with 320 grit, just really lightly, just to knock down those fibers. And then when the customer decides to wash their board the next time, it shouldn't have a rough surface after that. All right, so now I'm gonna let that sit and just let it air dry. I've got a heater right here that I'm actually just gonna turn on just to speed this up a little bit. And then once that's all dry, we'll grab it and hit it with 320, and then we're almost done. So we popped the grain with water. We came back with 320 grit. It's super nice and glassy smooth. One of the last things I like to do with my boards is throw my logo on there. So I just recently got this laser. It's pretty sweet. So I'm gonna pop this board into the bed here, and I am going to get my logo fired up here on the computer, and then we're gonna go ahead and laser etch my logo on there. This is another kind of scary part of the process, but it's just the logo. So the logo is lined up and we are good to go. So one of the last steps here is just throw on some food grade mineral oil, let that soak into the board overnight, up to 24 hours. After that, we're gonna just remove the excess and then put on some board butter and we're completely finished. So this part's pretty exciting. It'll really bring the colors in the board alive. I'm just gonna go ahead and spread this around now. And then I'm gonna flip it, I'm gonna turn it, and I'm gonna get this back. Okay, I think we are all set. Gonna let this board sit for a while and soak in that oil, and we're gonna come back in a little bit. All right, our board has been oiled and we've wiped off the excess. And the very last step here is to throw some board butter on. Board butter is just a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. It just gives the board a nice water repellent finish. We're gonna throw some of this on. I make my own. And so what's gonna happen is this beeswax is gonna harden just to give it a little bit of water repellency. And I'm gonna get the back. We can let that sit for about 5 to 15 minutes. And then I'm gonna just buff the rest of the board butter out, and then we're all done. So now we're gonna buff out this board butter on here. I just use the blue shop rags. You know, you can use a powered buffer for this, but you can also just do it by hand, just like this. This can come out just fine. All right, I think we're finally all done with this board. Yeah, I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I like the darker sort of tone to this board, and that maple really makes it pop. Working in a tiny shop like this, it takes so many steps to get a board to this stage, but once I see it finished like this, it's a real work piece that I'm proud of. So, really happy with the way this turned out.